So I'm going to invite you into the spirit of reflection and meditation, but I'm also going to invite you to do something differently, because today is a day that we are celebrating the 450th anniversary of the Edict of Torda, and which we will be celebrating again throughout this year, but also our ability to gather here as a free religious people. And so we have the ability to do things in a different way and to do things in a way that speaks to our heart. So this morning, I'm going to invite you to join me in a litany, and this is your part. We hear a lot about freedom. We hear that word used in many, many contexts. And what I think is important is that when we hear words that are used in a particular way to promote a particular closed way of thinking, that in our tradition, we invite ourselves to open those words and those actions back up again. So this litany, which is called Freedom Says Yes, invites us all to reflect on what that word means through the lens of our inclusive faith. I'm going to invite you just to practice. This is, you can say this in whatever way you'd like to, in that spirit of meditation and reflection, but let's say it together. Freedom says yes. Freedom makes things bigger, expands the possibility. True freedom brings more people to the table, more ideas to the fore. Freedom welcomes the contributions of the many. It does not hold the power in the few. Freedom says yes. Freedom gives love a larger canvas. It does not constrict the heart with hate. Freedom grows the mind and the soul and is the true lifeblood of community. Freedom knows that an unfettered heart can learn love across borders, and freedom says yes. Our ancestors died because unity affirms and misused power divides. Our forebears knew that to allow another freedom of belief is to provide one's own grace. Our prophets saw a need for an enlarged knowledge of what we can make whole together. They knew that freedom says yes. 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 May we be the ones to make it so.
The other day, I learned that we needed a new table in our home, and that took us to the Habitat for Humanity Restore, where we discovered this old pine table. It was very rough. In fact, I was ready just to leave that old pine table right there in the Restore. But my wife Ruth convinced me that with a little loving care, maybe a little sanding, a little shellac, a little stain, and then finally some polyurethane, we could have a beautiful new table. Matthew Crawford, in his book Shop Class as Soulcraft, says that shared memories attached to the material souvenirs of our lives, and producing them is a kind of communion with others and with the future. So as I helped sand down that table and later spread the shellac on and put the stain on both the table and my hands, it took me a while to get it off. I thought afterwards I should have wore gloves, but nothing that a little vodka couldn't take care of. The oil paint, glad it wasn't good vodka. I wondered as I did that, what conversations may be had around this table? What arguments may be fomented and possibly solved as we sit together at this table? What homework might be done? What might be learned at this table? What life will happen around the table? Tables have found importance in many parts of life. I read recently that the Mir space station, the Russian space station that was in orbit from about 1986 through 2001, in fact had a communal table. It was a rather high-tech table. You could reheat various, freeze-dried meals at that table. It had a vacuum just in case any crumbs got away from the table. You could vacuum the crumbs up because crumbs are not good on space stations in electronics, I am told. It was a beautiful multi-colored dining table located in the core of the module. And not only could indeed you heat up tubes of liver stroganoff and chicken with white sauce, astronauts also gathered around that table. Astronauts from multiple nations, reheating various foods, but talking across the table with one another. The station was in service for 15 years, 3 times longer than it was expected. It had the battle scars to prove it, mold breakouts, fire, a collision with another cargo spacecraft. Once, though, it was decommissioned, most of it burned up in the Earth's atmosphere, but that table was saved and is now in the Memorial Museum of Cosmonauts in Moscow, where you can still see it, the table that astronauts sat around. The table can be a metaphor for all the ways we gather together. We gather at the table for learning, for friendship, mourning, arguing, for sustaining relationships, for mirth and ritual, civility, and even just for spilling almond milk. When we share a table, we can see one another more clearly. We can share and pass the bread with gluten and without. We find openings even to share our gratitude with one another. And the table for me has become a focus of that Thanksgiving dinner. Often time is spent making that table just right, dressing it with gourds and pumpkins and leaves, etc., making it as beautiful as possible. An extra effort is put in. And I think this effort promotes what I think of in Unitarian Universalism as our theology of relationship, our call to build relationship with one another around the table, strengthening those connections, reminding each other that indeed we are not alone. Tables become a place for sharing stories, sharing with one another our joys and our sorrows. It can be a place to begin to unpack the hard stories of our lives. Given the complex, problematic, and oppressive nature of the origins of this beloved American holiday of Thanksgiving, the table can be a place to address questions like the one posed by Lawrence Ellis, who asks if Thanksgiving is rooted in a tradition of giving gratitude to and for the support of First Nations people, and many or most First Nations people have deeply mixed feelings about the day, with many viewing it as a day of mourning. What's the consciousness that I should bring to the day? I love Thanksgiving, that annual invitation to the table. I love it so much I celebrate it 2 times a year. Once on the second Monday in October, I call it Canadian Thanksgiving, and then once just the other day, which I call American Thanksgiving. It's fun to have 2 occasions a year for an excuse to get together, to eat, and to share gratitude. The occasion sometimes reminds me of the prayer practice that Alice Walker suggests when she writes, "Thank you is the best prayer that anyone could say. I say that one a lot. Thank you expresses gratitude, humility, and understanding." And yet, even with the best intentions that we bring to the table, sometimes our gatherings with others, particularly ones on high holy days, they sometimes miss the mark. our expectations are sometimes not met. Sometimes we can leave with seeming like our relationships are even more strained than we began. But I think that even like an old abandoned pine table in a Habitat for Humanity restore that can, with a little sanding and a little TLC, be renewed, our relationships, with a little time and attention, can also be renewed and restored and made anew. For me, there is always hope. May we ever find old, renewed, and new tables to practice the art of being human and being in relationship with one another. May it be so.